Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. And how much do you know about the geography and topography of the West Bank? We hear it discussed all the time, the West Bank. It's a subject of intense, often passionate debate. Should Israel give up control of the West Bank? Whom does the West Bank belong to? Is it Palestinian territory? Should it become a Palestinian state? And everyone seems to have an opinion. But the truth is, many Americans have never even been to the West Bank and can only imagine what the West Bank looks like. For example, if one were to drive a car from the Mediterranean Sea due east towards Jordan and the Jordan River, and one traveled through the state of Israel and then continued due east through the West Bank, again heading for the Jordan River, what would the ride be like? Well, Mark Langfan is a man on a mission. He's a successful businessman in New York City. He is passionate in his concern for the state of Israel, and he's the president of AFSI, Americans for a Safe Israel, which Mark identifies as being on the hard right. But Mark Langfan is known for most are the maps of Israel he carries with him seemingly all the time. Maps which Mark believes every Jew, every American should become familiar with. For Mark believes that before anyone can say that they know or have a position on what should be done with the West Bank, one should have a real sense of the geography and topography of the region, which Mark believes is critical to one's understanding of the future of the Middle East. And I must say, I think most of you will find Mark Langfan's explanation of the topography of the West Bank and how it impacts water flow to both Israelis and Palestinians. It'll be illuminating and eye-opening. Here's my meeting with Mark Langfan.
I score a meeting with the New York Times editorial board. So I go there with my maps and my briefing book and my documents, and I put the map down. Several of the key editors there for Israel. Of course, you had the Jewish editor who starts attacking me right away, pointing at the map and laughing at me in front of the other editors. And he's pointing at the West Bank. And he's saying, this is a joke. And I said, what's the joke? What's the joke? He says, you're never going to prove to me that this West Bank is strategically important for Israel. And I look at him, and I immediately know that I've hit on something, because what he was pointing at was not the West Bank.
Oh, wow.
What he was pointing at was the West Bank of the literal West Bank of the Jordan River. Okay, so then I actually showed him what the West Bank was, and he went into really shock. So for an hour, I was in the New York Times editorial board office, and I was told by Sidney Zion that I had literally blown the New York Times editorial board away. All they did for a month was call everyone in the Jewish community, who is this Langfan? Where did he get this briefing book from? Where did he get these things from? And so from then on, I knew I had really hit the mother lode.
Yes, you had. Out of your experience with the topography of the Middle East, the maps you've seen, you have drawn certain conclusions.
Yes.
And the conclusions you have drawn are ones which resonate more with people on the far right.
Yes.
Okay. The bottom line for you, which is a right-wing position, is what?
Which is the territory of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, cannot be in any extent created into a Palestinian state.
So you're against the two-state solution,
Yes.
and you're against the Palestinians having control of the West Bank.
Yes.
And as far as you're concerned, Eretz Yisrael should include what we call the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and what is known as Israel proper. You want everything from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea to be the modern state of Israel.
Yes.
Okay. And because you take that position, you are now on the far right.
Yes.
And the only last question, then I want you to show me the map, and I want you to show us how the map propels you in this direction. What you're saying is that this was not a position you had before you began studying the maps. Am I correct?
Yes.
Because this is very important for our audience to understand.
Yes.
What Mark is telling us is that before he became as familiar with the geography, topography of the Middle East, at that point you were not yet on the far right.
No.
But you believe that any rational person who sees what you're about to show us would draw some conclusions, and the conclusions you have drawn put you on the far right.
Yes.
I've said it correctly.
Yes.
Okay.
In terms of AFSI, I, as an American
Americans
Jew,
for Safe Israel.
Americans for Safe Israel, I actually have, as an American Jew and as chairman of AFSI, I actually personally have 2 extra words that are part of AFSI, which is not only Americans for a Safe Israel, but Americans for a Safe Israel for America.
You'll explain how you add those 2 words
That's
and why.
exactly
Very,
the
very
point.
interesting, very interesting. What you're looking at for a moment here is what all of us recognize as, quote, the modern state of Israel. I want to dissolve now to the map that Mark has put on our table. And Mark, describe the portion of Israel that is contained in this map, because we are not looking at the entire state of Israel.
Right. You're basically looking at the northern 2/3 of Israel, in that this is the Golan Heights, and I take off my blue patch. This is now the Jordan River that runs down into the Dead Sea.
From the Kinneret, show
From
the Kinneret.
This is
Sea of Galilee.
Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret. It runs downhill to here, which is the lowest point on the earth. And to the east, you have Jordan. To the west, you have what is now Israel, except for the following situation. This is the green line. So the West Bank is this entire area between the green line and the Jordan River.
The Jordan River has become the boundary of Jordan itself.
Yes.
So everything east of the Jordan River is Jordan.
Everything east of the Jordan River is Jordan, and everything west of the Jordan River is now under the control of Israel.
Okay.
That's what this is about.
This is the West Bank. Here is Jerusalem. And again, what Mark has said is the line that is green here is really what was the 1949 armistice line.
Exactly.
In the War of Independence, the state of Israel was in here, and it was pushing towards the Jordan River. And basically the Arab League and the Arab armies were here, and they were trying to push as far as they could. And the way it was expressed is, we're going to push all the Jews into the sea. But what they really wanted to do was eradicate the state of Israel by moving as far to the sea as they could.
That was in the 1948-49.
48-49 war, the War of Independence. And what happened is that basically the Israeli army, the Haganah, the IDF, was able to push in some places further towards the Jordan River than the United Nations partition plan had suggested. And in January of 1949, an armistice was imposed upon the 2 warring parties. They knew the date and the day and the hour that the armistice was to go into effect. The Israeli army did everything it could to keep pushing towards the east. And the Arab League at that point, the Arab Legion and the Arab League, was doing everything itself to kind of hold Israel back. And what happened was that when the armistice went into effect, this is where the Israeli army had reached. This is where the IDF had gotten to this far and no further. Had the war continued to go on, maybe another month, 2 months, it may have been that the armistice line would have been here, and maybe all of Jerusalem would have been inside the state of Israel. It was not that some international body said, let's draw a boundary here. No international body, not the United Nations. There was no agreement involving the United States of America, France, England, and any of the European nations. There was no agreement between Israel and the Arab world that this would be the border that separates Israel from whatever happens on what we call now the east side of the Green Line. It was simply, where did the armies end up on a given date in January of 1949? And they drew a line. Some people say they drew it in green ink. I don't know if they did or not. It became ever known to this day as the Green Line. Most American Jews, I talk to American Jews, Mark, all the time. They think the line was drawn by the United Nations, and this is the original United Nations partition plan. This has nothing to do with the partition plan, except that there are two peoples here. Nor was this a recognized border by any standing international body. The reality of life is that when things exist for a period of time, they become, and you're a lawyer, de facto. De facto, people are saying, well, this is the modern state of Israel. This is the border. The problem conceptually, it's a very difficult problem for American Jews and Americans to grasp. You understand this, and you can then comment on what I'm about to say. There is no qualitative difference between this piece of land and this piece of land, between this piece of land and this piece of land. It's all the same land, and the only reason there's a line here is that that's where the armies ended. From a Palestinian perspective, because the armies ended up here, doesn't mean that Israel is entitled to this part of the land and is not entitled to this part of the land. As far as the Palestinians is concerned, from the Palestinian perspective, this line is artificial. There's no logic in the Palestinian way of thinking to say, oh, this belongs to the Jews and this doesn't. And the reason why that's so important for American Jews and Americans to understand, if you ever say to a Palestinian, the land on this side of the Jordan River of the Green Line belongs to you, and this side doesn't, the Palestinian says, why? And if you are willing to concede, that this land on this side of the Green Line does belong to me, then you're acknowledging the land on this side of the Green Line belongs to me. Because from the Palestinian perspective, this line is just an accident. It's an accident. If this land and this land has no difference in quality or in juridical law, then the Palestinian says, the minute you tell me I'm entitled to the West Bank, as far as I'm concerned, you're telling me I'm entitled as well to the land inside the Green Line. And that's very problematic. And I want to be fair. There is within the Jewish world a feeling that this is all Eretz Yisrael, and that this line is an accident, and that if the state of Israel is entitled to land inside the Green Line, there are Jews who say, why isn't Israel entitled to all of the land on the other side of the Green Line as well? And it's a very difficult argument to counter. And the people who have countered it, and now I'm not talking about Mark, and Mark has been honest to tell you he's on the far right. I'm going to ultimately ask him to explain to us, how does this map push him to the far right? But the only answer you can ever give is, there are two peoples in this land. And the Jewish community understood that in 1938 and 39 when the Peel Commission came out and said the only way there would be peace in the land is to share the land. We'd already lost, by the way, all the land to the east of the Jordan River. The original Balfour Declaration, the original plan of the League of Nations, when the entire idea of dividing this region into geographic areas. There was no Lebanon, there was no Syria, there was no Iraq. All of these were created by the League of Nations in 1917 and beyond. And what the League of Nations said was, this land will go to the Jews. It'll be a Jewish homeland, including the land on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And then in the 1920s, Winston Churchill, who was then the foreign minister of England, of Great Britain, lopped off all the land to the east of the Jordan River, which had been Palestine, and called it Transjordan, across the Jordan, and gave it to the king of the family that became the king, the Hashemite kingdom that became the ruling power in Jordan. And one of the ironies is, and for a long time you mentioned Sidney Zion earlier, Sidney Zion was one of the most articulate arguers for the fact that the Palestinians do have a state. It's called Jordan. And it's not the Jewish problem that the Hashemite king doesn't want to let the Palestinians be free in their own land. But as far as many people are concerned, there is a Palestinian state in existence already. It's right here on the eastern side of the Jordan River. It's called Jordan. But history moves on. Jordan is no longer considered a Palestinian state. And when people talk about creating a Palestinian state, they're talking about this territory here. And the only valid argument is for those Jews who say, look, there are two peoples in the land, and the only fair way and perhaps the only practical way to live together, two peoples, is if two peoples say, honestly, we'll live together side by side in peace. From 1938, from the Peel Commission on, the Jewish people have said, we will share the land in peace. They said it again in 47. They said it again in 48. At the same time, they weren't Palestinians at the time. They were Arabs. The Arab world said, oh, no, 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 no. We will never live in peace, two peoples in this land. The only solution is for there to be no Jewish state at all. And that has been the Arab stand, formal Arab stand, from really the 1920s through the 30s, through the 40s, through the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, through the millennium and into the year 2014 as Mark and I sit at this table together. What you ultimately, you, the viewer, want to do with this politically is your right to do, and I'm not here to tell you what to do. I am saying that Mark is right in one overarching respect. No matter what he tells us for the rest of this edition of L'Chaim, he's right about one thing is very important. You have to know the history. You have to know.
100%.
Once you know you're a human being, you've got a brain, you can figure out what the best solution is for this, what has been an intractable problem. You know, I had my eyes checked today. I'm talking to my ophthalmologist who's saying to me, he knows who I am, he knows what I do. All he could do, Mark, was talk about this intractable problem that has been for hundreds of years, it really is hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years. Anyway, the reason why I wanted Mark here was it gives us a chance to at least put this in historical, factual context, and now you can draw your own conclusions. I now want you to explain, first of all, the topography, which you've done for me before. It's fascinating, but you now handle, what do you want us to understand? What do you want us to understand?
Let's first take away the point about the New York Times editor, where he comes to me and he points over here and he says, oh, you're talking about this little thing here, that's strategically important, that's a joke. And I say, no, we're actually talking about a mountain range. Okay? And Mark is right. Before 49, there were actually Jews sprinkled out everywhere. There were Jews in Hebron. There was Jews all over this area.
Of course.
Okay? So it wasn't just that there were Jews before 49, 48 were living in this area. Okay? But now, this is the green line. And so this is basically pre-67 Israel, everything to the west of that green line. But what I do is I take my little blue patch and I put on my blue patch right there. And to give a little bit of highlight to the fact that between this green line here and the Mediterranean Sea is 10 miles. So when they talk about Israel is 10 miles wide, this is the area we're talking about. as well as from here to here, this is 40 miles. And the key point is 70% of Israel's Jewish population and 80% of her industrial base is under this blue patch.
70%?
70% of Israel's population and 80% of her industrial.
Show some of the cities that are in there.
You've got Tel Aviv, Herzliya, Netanya, Hadera, Binyamina, just you name it, it's under here. And when you add Jerusalem, that's sticking out like a sore or a sore pinky over here, surrounded by to the north and south and east, the West Bank, you're talking 80 to 85% of Israel's population is right in this area. So what you're talking about is not, when you're looking at, oh, the whole Israel. What you're looking at is starting a war that will be coming at you from the east with these mountains defending 80% of your population, as opposed to starting here to defend 80% of your population.
Can you explain where this mountain range is?
The mountain range, really, you have to look at it as a valley, in that this is the Jordan River, and this is the Jordan Rift Valley, where on the west side, you've got these mountains, and on the right side, you've got these mountains. So there's really sort of a symmetry when you look at it. And just to give everybody a biblical notion of what's going on here, what happened was Moses did not attack and capture Israel through the south.
Correct.
Moses actually took a detour and went into the Holy Land from Jordan first, and then this is the Jericho. So you understand why Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and why Jericho was so critical, in that it was actually the hinge point to be able to start its way up to Jerusalem. So the idea
up to Jerusalem,
which is
yes,
that,
and you can
which
see
is where you have the spine, this north-south spine of this mountain range, where Jerusalem is, in fact, you can see why Jerusalem is Jerusalem, because it served as the roadway, where this was the most popular roadway through this passage before you had planes or trains, automobiles. So,
and that's also why you go up
to Jerusalem. Okay, now, when I say mountains, I'm not talking the Rocky Mountains, where the Rocky Mountains are about 4,000 meters high. But then again, you've got hundreds of kilometers, of miles of that, the Rocky Mountains. I'm talking about between here and here, there's about 50 miles, okay? So you're going from the lowest point on Earth to 1,000 meters in 10 miles, which is a huge, huge, huge differential. So you're talking a very, very steep terrain. And then you're talking a gradual descent. Now, actually, one of the first things I learned, which really was, in many respects, the beginning of my true adventure, was that when you look at the Golan Heights, you now understand why the Golan Heights is important for water. Because water falls here. This is the watershed line, meaning any water that falls there goes that way. Any water that falls here on the west side of the Golan Heights goes into the Sea of Galilee. Okay? Now, the point was that the Golan Heights is important for water. Well, look at this part of the West Bank. This part of the West Bank is in many respects almost 3 times as large as the Golan Heights. And it turns out that this part of the West Bank is vital for water. In fact, 60% of Israel's water either comes from this area or is dependent on the water that falls in this area. So if the Palestinians are allowed full control of this area, they can keep all the water. And as the JNF will tell you, it turns out that water is the lifeblood of Israel and really any country in the Middle East. And water is one of the huge fighting issues that make this make the peace process almost unsolvable.
Although it's never discussed.
It's never discussed, okay? Except it's discussed on the Palestinian negotiating website where they've actually have a map of the water resources of the what? You would like me to show?
Sure.
Okay. So this was one of my greatest finds. This map was taken off the website of the Palestinian National Authority, Ministry of Planning. This is not a right-wing, a hard right-wing map. Mm-hmm. This is, in fact, the map of the Palestinians themselves. So you are right. All the facts are the same, except that once you see this map, this map is the Rosetta Stone of the entire peace process, or however you want, quote-unquote, peace process.
I've never seen this map.
Okay, yes, and you are going to see why this map is unintelligible except if you see this map, and why this map is the key to the entire quote-unquote peace process we have been working on.
Okay, do me a favor, and let's key each of these two maps on the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. The Dead Sea, show them the top of the Dead Sea.
The top of the Dead Sea is right here.
Okay, and in this map, here's the top of the Dead Sea.
Top of the Dead Sea. This up here is the outcoming of the
so in
Sea
essence,
of Galilee.
this does not go as high as the Sea of Galilee.
No, absolutely. It just goes to the very tip of the north of the
so this
West
this
Bank.
map here ends around here.
Ends around here.
Okay. So now we know.
Top part.
Okay, so we're basically looking at this part.
You're looking at the lobes. You're looking at the two lobes.
Yes, that's correct. Very, very. I'm sorry. You're right. Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So the first thing to understand is if you look at, it says up here water aquifers, and you see this fragile line? You're not going to be, on TV you're not going to be able to see it.
But there's a line there?
There's a line there. You see this line right here?
Yes.
You see this line right here?
Yes.
You see this line going all the way down here?
Yes.
Okay. This says mountain aquifer. This says, and this is, I did not touch this map. This is northeastern aquifer, and this is eastern aquifer. Why are these lines this way? Well, if you go back to this map, you'll see that the north part, and I'm not talking about the south part of the West Bank for now, I'm just talking about the north part of the West Bank, has 3 different watersheds. Meaning, if you drop a drop of water, it's going to go down naturally in these 3 watersheds. Meaning, if you drop a drop of water here, it's going to go north, because if you're here and you drop a drop of water, it's going to go north.
It's going to go downhill.
It's going to go downhill.
In this
water
instance,
goes downhill.
Right.
Okay. So when you look at this map, all of a sudden you say, yeah, this is the dividing line, and this is the dividing line on the aquifer, and then you have the mountain aquifer, which they call the mountain aquifer here, or the western aquifer, which is everything that goes this way. So in fact, water hits the West Bank and goes 3 different ways. It goes west, north, and east.
Okay.
Based on the topography.
Yep.
So now, that's fact number 1. Fact number 2 is, you see how steep all of this is right here? Remember, when you went from minus 1,000 to plus 1,000, minus 100, minus like 800 meters to plus 1,000 inside of 10 miles. Well, if you look at this, the legend has this brown,
yes,
and the sort of the
gray.
the green gray. The tan, the brown, is areas of built-up Palestinian population centers. The green is Israeli settlements. Okay? So now,
as of 2006.
As of 2006, nothing much has changed.
So basically, what we can see here where the Palestinians identify where Palestinians live and where Israelis live.
Israeli settlers live.
Where Israeli settlers live.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. By the way, it doesn't look to me like there's a lot of green.
That's right. There isn't a lot of green, but this is the interesting point. In this area here, there's almost no brown. Mm-hmm. which then brings us to this area here. So all of a sudden, you're starting to see something, that the demography of the West Bank actually is topographically derived.
What percentage of Israel's water comes from the Golan Heights? What percentage comes from the
About
West Bank?
30 to 35%,
35?
about 60%.
Double?
Yes, and double for the following reason. Not only does water come from the West Bank, but you have to remember, you have the Mediterranean Sea here as well. And salt water pushes in. And so what happens is, right now, there's what's called osmotic pressure between the fresh water pushing out and the salt water pushing in.
Why is that relevant?
Because if the Palestinians pump out fresh water from here, salt water comes in and destroys these aquifers as well, which is exactly what has happened in the Gaza Strip.
Are you saying that the fresh water somehow protects
Yes.
Israel from an assault by the saltwater sea?
Yes, it's called saltwater intrusion. It's not a religious thing. It's not a thing that happens in Israel.
Okay.
It actually happens all over the world.
So what you're telling us at the moment is, based on the way the topography works, the water works, it would be dangerous for Israel to relinquish control of the area which provides 60% of its fresh water.
Yes.
Okay.
Why did the Jews get this land? You know why? Because it was marshes. There were mosquitoes. Why? Because the water went here and it turned into bogs. It was a mosquito infest. What did the Jews do? Well, they took, but the point was, why was it boggy? Because all the water came down naturally. Okay, and the Palestinians didn't know what to do with it. What did the Jews do? They said, okay, I'm going to suck the water out and I'm going to make it into something fertile and to something, grow something. And all of a sudden they make lemonade out of lemons, okay? But here, what happens is that under international law, it's called international riparian right law, Israel has legal rights to keep the water, that even if, let's just say for hypothetical sake, that you want to say the 67 border or the 1949 armistice lines is an internationally recognized armistice line. Under the Helsinki Protocols for Water Rights, you have to take the historical usage, how the parties divided the water. So right now, when in 67, Israel was getting like 80 or 90% of the water that fell here.
After the Six-Day War.
After the at the time of the Six-Day War, okay?
Wait a minute. At the time of the Six-Day War.
At the time of the Six-Day War, all of this water was falling, before Israel captured this.
Yes.
All of the water was coming to pre-67 Israel.
Because Jordan didn't stop it from flowing.
Because Jordan, and there were not a lot of Palestinians there, relatively speaking, okay? Number one, there has been, of course, a huge explosion in the populations on both sides. But number two, understanding what I've just shown you is one of the keys to defeating the BDS movement. Why? Because unbeknownst to a lot of people, the BDS movement says Israel is stealing the Palestinians' water. Why? The reason is because they're protecting the Palestinians from stealing the water from them by being here. Mm-hmm. So Israel isn't stealing the water. It turns out that under international law, even if you want to assume a 67 border, they have the right to that water. But no one even understands that because no one gets to the topography of it. But getting back to the issue we have at hand here, one of the biggest claims is that Israel now, before there's even a peace process of extra Palestinians coming into this area, they're saying, oh, the Palestinians don't have enough water. They need more water because there's not enough water per capita, whatever numbers they want to throw out. The fact is, could you imagine if there is not enough water now for 1.5 million to 2 million Palestinians living here now, what is going to happen when you put another 2 million Palestinians here? Once you give possession of this, you can't stop people from digging illegal wells. In fact, now the Palestinians are digging illegal wells. And the only way Israel stops the Palestinians from digging illegal wells is they send soldiers into this area to pull out the wells. And building a water well is a totally peaceful, quote unquote, endeavor. So how do you stop the Palestinians from peacefully digging water wells that can deprive your whole country of water? But then it gets worse. Not only does fresh water go downhill, but crap water goes downhill. Refuse water goes downhill. And under this picture that we have up here, this is where all the Palestinians are. So they go to the bathroom. And so what happens is, even though hundreds of millions of dollars have been earmarked for the Palestinian, and Mr. Robinson of the JNF will tell you, the JNF has gone to the Palestinians in these areas and said, we'll build you water treatment plants, water sewage treatment plants. You know what the Palestinians say? Pound sand. Leave us alone. You know why? Because they just want to be able to commit jihad by toilet, which is put all this refuse water into the aquifers so that it goes downhill and it destroys the Israeli aquifers. That's the peace process up to now. Okay, so I don't even gut with Katyusha rockets. I say, wait a sec. If people were wanting to be peaceful, what would they do? They'd say, sure, let's have water sewage treatment plants built by the IMF, built by the American taxpayer, which, by the way, has paid for water sewage treatment plants that have never been built, that have gone to God only knows what bank account in Switzerland. So let's be peaceful. But if the Palestinians are now refusing to build water sewage treatment plants when they're supposedly putting their best foot forward, what are they going to do when Israel has no rights to this area? Because now, under the peace agreement, this area is co-managed by a joint water commission. And the water commission has to approve of any wells that are being dug. Joke, joke, wink, wink, nod, nod. They can't pull out all of the illegal wells that are being dug. Let me give you an example. Let's say New Jersey has a complaint with New York about water that's coming through. Okay, yeah, we have a Supreme Court of the United States that we can go to the Supreme Court, and even if New Jersey was stealing the water, ultimately there is a court in the land that can hear the dispute. And no one's saying that 60% of New York's water is coming from New Jersey. But what happens in this situation, where all of a sudden the Palestinians desire to peacefully keep 100% of the water? What court are they going to be going to that's going to have jurisdiction to actually affect this? So you're done.
I have to say, it's a very both fascinating and effective piece of information you've given us. I don't think most Americans or most American Jews have any sense of the water topography and the critical issues that water and topography now pose.
If I could just interject here for a second.
Sure.
Okay. What you said earlier was perhaps the most dramatic thing I've ever heard in an interview to me. Okay. It was, don't the left have the same facts that the right-wing Jews have? Well, I'm going to tell you something. I scored a meeting with the State Department mapping division, where I went to the State Department, and the reason why I got in, because they love topographic maps. They had never seen a topographic map of Israel. Okay. So I get in, and I pull out this map. They look at the two nice guys. They look at me. They say, that's the funniest thing. And I said, what's funny about this? They said 3 months ago, another Jew came into this office and showed us that map. But he was on the left. They go like this, but he was on the left. And I look at him. And so what did he say? They said to me, quote unquote, That American Jew with the same exact map came into this office in the United States State Department and told the United States State Department that Israel was stealing the Palestinians' water. Okay? So I looked at him and I said, well, okay. And I had the map on like a piece of paper like this. So I said, okay, so at least we agree on the map. They said, oh yeah, this is definitely definitely map. No, there's the water. No, definitely these are the aquifers. So it's okay. Did this American Jew tell you that it wasn't a flat map like this, but it was, I took the thing and folded it like this. It was a topographic map like you see. Nope, didn't tell us that. Did this American Jew tell you that water, I use this as sort of the echoing the cross-section, and the basic way I say it is just imagine, forget the West Bank, forget Israel, forget Judea and Samaria. Just imagine if this was a house, a roof of a house that everyone's seen, and water falls on the roof. Okay, what happens? Well, the water falls off this way and the water falls off this way. Did this American Jew tell you that water hits Western Samaria, and because of the topography go to the coastal plain, so even if this is a international border, Israel has riparian rights? No, that
Did they
American
know
Jewish.
riparian rights?
Nope. Okay. Did they tell you that salt water pushes in and fresh water pushes out, and if the Palestinians soak up the milkshake, slurp up the milkshake, the entire coastal plain can get intruded by water, salt water, and be destroyed? Nope, didn't tell us that either.
Did the American Jew not know enough, or do you think the American Jew obfuscated?
I think the American Jew obfuscated. I think the American Jew had an agenda, which is a peace now at any cost to Israel and to Jews. So who knows? Quite frankly, I don't really spend my time chasing left-wing Jews that go into the State Department and get access to the State Department and spill a bunch of lies that are slanders. And in fact, it's a vicious slander because it's a water libel. Saying that Jews are keeping Palestinians from having the proper water is akin to saying they're committing war crimes.
Answer for those of us who hear all the time. Israel controls the water. There are Palestinians living on the West Bank, and Israel doesn't give Palestinians their fair share. Is that true?
It is not true. It is not true.
How is it not true?
The first question is, what is the fair share to begin with?
They should have enough water to drink and to use for all of the normal
Absolutely.
human functions, and water their lawn too, and go into a swimming pool.
Okay, now, but before we get to the swimming pool issue, which is semi-red herring, but what happens is the amount of water that is pulled out of the West Bank is pretty fairly accounted for. Sometimes you can't account for illegal wells, but that's something else. But if you take the amount of per capita water that the Palestinians get, they actually have more per capita water than the Jordanians or the Syrians.
But not more than the Israelis.
Not more than the Israelis. But then again, the Israelis are, number one, desalinating water at their own cost. Number two, they had the water that was coming to them to begin with.
Yes, but we're talking about on the West Bank.
Yeah, but no, the Jews in the West Bank are counted in the Israeli portion. The Jews in the West Bank.
On the West Bank have more water than Palestinians on the West Bank?
That's right, because they are considered Israelis.
No, I mean in real life. If they're living on the West Bank, they do not have the same water opportunities that people inside the Green Line have.
Yeah, they don't have the same opportunities because, number one, the Palestinians have refused to build water sewage treatment plants.
Yeah, I want to know whether Israelis and Palestinians living in the same geographic area, do they have the same water opportunities?
No.
Isn't that what is bothering certain people?
But the reason why they're not having the same opportunities is because the Israelis recycle their water.
For people on the West Bank?
No, for people in Israel. Part of the water Israel uses, when you take a per capita.
Somehow there's a disconnect here.
Okay.
I'm only talking about the following issue. If people are living in if Jews are living in Karnei Shomron, and there is an Arab village nearby, there are 2 or 3 Arab villages nearby Karnei Shomron, do the Arab villagers have the same amount of water that the Jews living in Karnei Shomron have?
No.
Because?
Because, number one, the Palestinians have refused to use their water in a judicious way where they have to recycle their water. The water that Israel uses isn't just this water. They take the water and then they use the water again.
In Karnei Shomron?
Yes, in all of Israel. A huge part of Israel's water.
We're talking about the West Bank here.
In the West, when you talk about the West Bank in terms of settlers, the water that the Israeli settlers are using is part of the Israeli number.
How do they get the water?
They get the water by pipes, and that's another thing. The Palestinians have refused to build water pipes, and instead they've got leaky water pipes. But this is the best part about it. What happened when the Palestinians took over the Gaza Strip, you'd say, oh, well, they got more water because all of a sudden you didn't. In fact, they got less water. This is the biggest lie of it all, and this actually feeds into your question. What happened was all of a sudden, the people who decided who got the water and who didn't get the water was Hamas. Okay? In the West Bank, what's going on? You know who decides who gets water and who doesn't get water in the West Bank? Abbas. How, when they talk about Palestinian graft, what are they talking about? They're talking about the Palestinians have control, or Abbas has control over the water supply of the West Bank. And so all of a sudden, he's charging whoever can pay money. And what's he doing with the money? He made his uncle a gazillionaire.
Okay. It seems to me you're saying that if for no other reason,
that's right.
It would be bad to do a two-state solution and hand over all of this we have now basically talked about is a water supply,
right,
which is crucial to Israel's existence.
You got it.
It would be a mistake. Let's leave the morality out for a moment.
Morality aside.
It would be a mistake
It'd be the end of Israel.
to relinquish control
That's right.
of this area of land because of its importance vis-a-vis water.
Right.
It seems to me that the only argument for a two-state solution is predicated on the notion that you're living with somebody in honest peace.
Right.
If I can't have honest peace, I don't want to do this. And I don't think anybody who cares about Israel, and you don't have to be a Jew, if you believe in the sovereignty of the state of Israel, if you're a Jew, you have an emotional pull. But if you are a caring, thoughtful human being, Jew or non-Jew, you should not put a sovereign state into virtual jeopardy. Suicide.
That's exact.
Okay.
It's that, and it gets to the suicide issue.
Okay, so if I'm assuming that it's going to be U.S. and Canada. If I can't assume U.S. and Canada, I don't believe anybody. I don't believe the American administration. I don't believe anybody should ask Israel to make peace
100%.
unless, as Bret Stephens says, it's Canada.
The Bret Stephens
Okay.
Canada. I agree. That's
Okay.
the Bret Stephens Canada.
Now I'm
America.
saying to you the following. Now let's assume it's Canada.
Okay.
What you've said to me is, even if it's Canada, there's a problem here. Because you don't want, as a sovereign nation should have control of its water rights. And I'm asking you now, are you saying to me that you, assuming this messianic picture I'm drawing for you, that suddenly the Palestinians become Canada? If it were Canada, under those circumstances, would Mark Langfan say, in that instance, we can work out the water rights and let's create a second state?
No.
What would you say then?
I'd say, if it's California, you
Canada.
could. I know, but I'm giving you a better situation. Okay? I'm giving you a better situation. Even if it was California, where you had Northern California and Southern California, this couldn't survive. And the reason is because what would happen is Northern California would all of a sudden have an economic debilitating hammer over Southern California.
Okay.
They'd say, okay,
Then,
I
okay,
exist.
I got it, Mark.
I'm
I
gonna,
got it.
I'm
I got
going
it.
to
Okay.
bleed you for
Okay,
as much
we all
as
got
you
it.
are worth.
Then the other question for you is, what is your solution?
Okay.
If you have now shown us why, from your perspective, creating a second Palestinian state here is just suicide, what do you do with the fact that there are, and who knows, is it 1.5 million, is it 3 million? We don't know.
You're right.
But there is a substantial Palestinian population which is at the moment living under a circumstance where they do not have the kind of civil rights, and it doesn't matter that they wouldn't have them in any other Arab country. At the moment, they're living in a way which we would love to see them not have to live in.
You're right.
What is the solution?
I have no solution, except in the fact that what the Palestinians and what the Arabs thought 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it is changing. And it is actually a very interesting thing. There is a divergence between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and also with this whole ISIS thing. And in respect of what you just said, there just came out a Pew Study poll which talked about, are suicide bombings legitimate? And they took a poll of the West Bank, and would you believe, West Bank and Gaza, would you believe 46% of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza believe that suicide bombing is legitimate often or sometimes.
What's the point?
The point is what you were just saying of there is this sea chasm of the people that you're dealing with and what you're dealing with is really, and people slitting other people's throats and allowing other people to slit other people's throats. We're talking as American Jews in a very comfortable, beautiful place.
All I'm saying is you have no answer.
I have no answer, except sometimes when you don't have an answer, you should say you don't have an answer.
Yes.
You should not lie to people
Yes, I
and
agree.
tell people there's a two-state solution. And that is the greatest shanda, that you have American Jews as well as many Israeli Jews who have been fed a false diet of there is a solution when there isn't a solution. And am I, Mark Langfan or Americans for a Safe Israel supposed to be coming up with the solution when the solution that I see is these 6 million Jews being eradicated? What is, you're giving me too many jobs here, okay? I have a job enough explaining
Very
to
fair.
people
Very fair.
that these people are under a knife
And
to
you're-
their throat.
Because you're honest. You're fabulous, by the way.
God bless you. You're fabulous too.
I wanted you here for so long. This is a wonderful, wonderful job you do. And
Thank
it's
you.
so important. It is so important
That's
for all
why
of us to
I've been
understand
doing it.
Well, you keep doing it. And again, we're
Amen.
putting a semicolon here. You're going to come back
Got
again.
a semicolon, baby.
Yasha koach to you. Kol tuva hatzlacha, and all you do, we'll meet often.
And condolences to the three boys' families and for the Israeli Jewish people and for the Jewish people for our loss.
Mark Langfan, chairman of AFSI, Americans for a Safe Israel. And again, Mark is saying something that you don't normally hear anywhere in
That's
the
the
Jewish
truth.
world or even in the secular. You never see this on CNN or on MSNBC or on NBC or on Fox. You just don't see it. So it's very important that I'm very proud that he came on and was able to show it here on Shalom TV. And again, bottom line, ultimately you have to decide for yourself, what's the solution? And I think Mark's very honest in saying, look, all we know is how complicated the problem is, but we shouldn't fool ourselves, he's saying, into adopting an inappropriate, and some people feel a suicidal solution because we want a solution. Sometimes, by the way, one simply has to hold on and see how things play out. And maybe one day there'll be a different context in which this whole discussion can be discussed. And maybe we don't have to wait for the Messiah to come. Maybe it will not be the days of the Mashiach, but before that, somehow people will figure out a way to live in this land in peace. But until then, the Jewish people have every right to protect themselves and their families and their children.
100%.
And and having said that, you have to also come to your own, you come up with your own perspective, and maybe your perspective is the same as Mark's, you don't know yet. And there's something very honest and mature about saying it's a problem that still is in search of a solution. In any case, those are my thoughts, and you've heard Mark's. Please, as always, be in touch with me with your own thinking. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall. And I'm telling you over and over, I'm a big tweeter now, so tweet me at Rabbi Mark S. Golub. My thanks to all those who put this program together, Sloan Copeland and Serge Goldberg. And our camera people had to work extra hard. Igor Funk is out of this world and does so much for Shalom TV in so many, many ways. And, Oleg Aswolenko is all over the place. Almost everything you see outside of when we cover events, almost always, it's Oleg who's making it possible. So we have two fabulous people on cameras today. Thanks also to Carol Lilienthal, producer of this edition of L'chaim. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.